Hey guys, how's it going? My name is Arden, and I'm just watching myself drink the beer and move the camera over right as the stream starts because YouTube's funny like that. So what's up? We're gonna talk about the final few episodes of WandaVision since I've last reviewed this series, which includes quite a bit. Since we last reviewed things, they really kind of dropped the whole it's a TV show premise and really started to get into the hows and the whys. We got a sense of how Westfield was created by Wanda and why she did it. We got a real good sense of kind of this history as a character and sort of why she created that little sitcom inspired community. And on the whole, it was a very enjoyable series of episodes, broadly speaking, even if I definitely enjoyed the first half of the series when it was more like a traditional sitcom, and to be honest, less so the part where it was more like the MCU. I also definitely feel a little vindicated by some of the show because I like registered Agatha Harkness as the villain pretty quickly, and she turned out to kind of be the main threat within this story, so to speak. But I was also kind of right about the show not really being this huge, big shift in the MCU the way some people like to claim on the whole clickbait side of things. I think to a degree, the show and the way Disney releases it, the whole current way the MCU kind of functions, it's very friendly towards being clickbait heavy. Zach Taff, thanks for joining us for stream. So what I mean by that is it's all just about speculation. Oh, is Magneto going to show up in this series? Is that character X going to show up in this and that? And I've talked about this on stream before, but I think one of the issues is just that we have to deal with like because like we do it here on Comic Island sometimes, and we have speculated on these things, especially early on in the show. But I tried to make it clear in those reviews I did think it was going to be more than anything a much more simple character bit, and on the whole, I think that was good. It was so cool seeing Evan Peters as Quicksilver in this weird alternate universe where, like, Agatha was using him to give the appearance of powers, and I don't necessarily think that's the end of the story there. I do also think it was interesting. Someone was saying on Twitter after the show ended that I follow, he was saying, like, well, I know they were kind of saying this is like a one off Disney show and there won't be another season, but the show really invites another season. It's not that it ends on a cliffhanger, it just ends in a way that really wants me to, like, for Wanda to have another show, another season, to do something else and maybe see a return of this family somehow. The whole thing was quite well done, and I enjoyed on the whole. There's tons of little comic book nods, but and some people were complaining that they felt forced, but I think it was pretty good and that sort of thing. Um, and yeah, on the whole, I definitely enjoyed it. Yeah, I heard about that stuff at Avengers, but I don't really, or the game that is. Zach Taft is talking about in chat, but we're talking about the show right now. And yeah, it's good times overall. I definitely think it left me excited for more stuff with the MCU, with them potentially trying different things going forward, because WandaVision was a great example of that in action. It wasn't a very traditional show in terms of what we might expect out of MCU content, and to be honest, I quite preferred that. If anything, when it gets all big, epic fight and standard comic book movie stuff, I get a little bored. I had to choose my words carefully there because it's not standard comic book stuff, it's comic book movie stuff. Comic books don't require an ending with a big superhero fight while some glowy energy is off in the sky with energy blasts and stuff like that. Some of them end that way, but not all of them. In fact, not most of them. And I'm strictly kind of talking about Marvel and DC stuff there. So there are habits I think I would like to see at the Marvel break in terms of their like MCU content that are still full on display at this point. But by and large, I do think the show is a step in the right direction. Now, um, Zach Taft says, I saw the final episode. I knew Wanda was going to win her fight after all the good guys win everything every time. That's a fair point, especially in that scene, because what happens is Wanda like drains out her power and blasts it all into Catherine Hahn, Agatha, and but she ends up surviving and kind of winning the day anyways, sort of thing. That's kind of what I'm talking about. Like we've seen that all before. That was all very predictable, and by then the show was at its kind of most boring. When it's supposed to be most exciting, it's the least interesting because it's stuff we've all seen before. Whereas the weird sitcom with strange horror elements and all this confusing, you don't really know what's going on. You don't really know who's responsible at first. I really liked all of that. The mystery was solid until everything kind of started to curve off in the wrong direction. And we went back into the old habits of the MCU and the big epic fight and that sort of thing. I don't necessarily think the show needed that, but it did definitely benefit from it when we had like the WandaVision family gathered together and using their powers and fighting. And just because the last episode wasn't as great as the rest of the series doesn't mean I didn't enjoy the whole thing. When Evan Peters shows up and he's using his powers and hanging out with the kids and like doing super speed stuff with them, that was amazing. That was so many excellent things at once. It reminded me of like American Horror Story and some of the character work Evan Peters has accomplished there. It reminds me of the X-Men movies because he is Quicksilver, but it also evokes a lot of Age of Ultron and the Avengers stuff because he has like false memories of that, kind of, but not really. It's fascinating. I really liked this show, broadly speaking, even if I think the ending is its weakest part. It was doing some interesting things. I really do hope we get another like season of this someday, because I will say this: if the whole point of the show and Wanda going through all this tragedy and struggle and kind of coming to terms with everything that happened as of Avengers Endgame, and the resolution to all that becomes she's some sort of villain or enemy in the Doctor Strange movie, I'm going to be very disappointed. I don't think that's the case, and my hope is actually some of this gets explored in like future Avengers movies, or like I said, a future iteration of WandaVision, maybe after Doctor Strange comes out or something like that. It really feels like there's more to Elizabeth Olsen's character and her story following this season, or this series, I guess we should say, because that's all it was ever supposed to be. Um, because like her character goes through stuff and then she kind of leaves with an uncertain future, and I really do think it's important what happens next for this character. She could go in a more positive direction and kind of develop as a person a little bit and maybe go in a better direction, or she might kind of regress and become a villain or something like that. And I really hope that isn't the case. If this is kind of the first foundation into her going in a more interesting direction, then I'm all for it. Because one of the most, in terms of future content, we don't actually get a ton of hints, but something very interesting gets dropped when we start to actually level the name Scarlet Witch. Because in the world of the MCU, that's a term that was like prophesized in this book of magic. And as Catherine Hahn's kind of reading all this information about the Scarlet Witch, she was created, kind of getting into the whole thing with Wanda being exposed to the Mind Stone, and it like kind of, as we learn, awakens her powers, but they were powers that were already there. And it does kind of confirm that Wanda's powers are magical in nature and not just metahuman, to borrow a term from DC. And it also says, perhaps most significantly of all, and that's why I put it on the thumbnail, that Wanda is stronger than the Sorcerer Supreme. Like that's what it says in the book. It's like the Scarlet Witch, like stronger than the Sorcerer Supreme. They say that outright, and I was like, oh damn. So it will be interesting to see what role Wanda has in the Doctor Strange movie and what comes of all of this, because they drop some pretty serious hints about just how powerful Wanda Maximoff really is across this series. Sort of vastly showing us this increase in power that we kind of saw before with her in the comics, where all of a sudden she went from being a standard Avenger to being something much more powerful and potentially dangerous. So, to what degree the future of Marvel intends on using this stuff, I am very curious. It could very well be that Wanda's appearance in Doctor Strange 2 is something as limited as like a post-credit scene or a little cameo, and her role and what's to come of this series is actually farther down the road. Could be interesting because then we could go into like full House of M, Avengers Disassembled territory, or something else entirely. The last of which would actually be my preference, something a little different and interesting. But we'll have to see. So yeah, that's it. I guess I don't really have much else to say other than that's just my general thoughts on the series as a whole. I would recommend it. I think it's good and really shows a lot of the promise of these Disney Plus shows and the quality and budget they can kind of level. I was truly impressed by everything we got out of WandaVision. I like how different it was from the standard MCU thing, even if it did kind of devolve back into a standard MCU production. And broadly speaking, I really do think it's interesting. The Shadowcatcher says everyone's saying she's going to be the villain in the Doctor Strange movie, but probably redeemed at the end. I really hope that's not the case. While it is kind of there in the text of her character, it's a weak direction for her to go after this stuff. She really kind of the way she leaves things with Vision is he says, "This isn't our first goodbye," and she replies, "So maybe this isn't like so maybe we'll get to say hello again," or something like that. That's not the tone that someone takes, and then the next time we see them in like a movie is them as a villain. That's bad writing if that's how it's going to be, and I really hope we're not going in that direction. Uh, Kalinity says, too many plot holes not used. I was hyped in the first 5 episodes, but the ending felt botched. Well, I did kind of see as I'm starting to wrap up, people are trying out their opinions, but that's okay. So yeah, I gave my thoughts, so we'll get into what people say in chat now. Kalinity says, too many plot holes. Yeah, so I definitely am kind of with him there. Once we started to kind of take a back seat from the TV stuff and like the premise of Westfield and start to dig into not only the outside world kind of monitoring them with like Kat Dennings and Jenny Wu, that sort of thing, it started to lose me a little bit. The charm of the original show gave way to like, oh, we gotta explain everything, we gotta deal with all this stuff, and we couldn't just enjoy the fun television-y stuff. And I definitely think that could have been handled better. I'm kind of with you there. I don't know if I'd go so far as to say botched because there's a lot of fun to it all. The encounter between Vision and the White Vision from like the comics was very cool, and the way that got resolved with the like fake Vision basically opening the memories of the government created Vision and letting him kind of forge his own path from there was good character stuff. And like I said, I liked when the family is all together doing their superhero thing. That like the ending does have its moments. I just wish it kind of followed through on its original premise a little better. But to be fair, it's also like, well, the whole series have really just been this television-y thing? My preference would have been yes, but I see the limits to that too, and understand there are realities to creating a show and having to work with it. I just wish it had been handled a little better. Zach Taff says, think Falcon and Winter Soldier will be good. I think it's going to be a lot more in the style of like the Captain America Winter Soldier film, kind of more like a tense actiony thing, and it's going to have to really deliver in that regard because they can't go like the crazy sitcom route of WandaVision. So we'll have to see, but I'm optimistic for it because honestly, broadly speaking, I did enjoy WandaVision, even if there's stuff to talk about and fairly criticize. I definitely don't feel I wasted my time on it or that it isn't worth someone's time to check out. Especially because this is like the first little hint of the future of the MCU. And there's a lot of interesting ideas on the table. It's cool how heavily involved mysticism is in the world of this film universe now. It wasn't like that in like the phase 1 and 2 days and such. So as this stuff's creeping in more and more, I am quite enjoying it. Michelle Jimenez says, sure, in the film Doctor Strange Multiverse of Madness, we see a battle between Doctor Strange versus Scarlet Witch, but there will be a bigger threat than Scarlet Witch, an Elder God maybe. I'm right there with you, Michelle. I don't think the directors or like the creators behind Doctor Strange 2 would be silly enough to make Wanda the villain. But it's so easy to do a superhero thing where there's a misunderstanding or they start fighting with each other and arguing, and then, we get the laser blast going. And there's a million ways the trailer can kind of mislead us in that regard. It could just be a vision of like, here's what's gonna happen if you do this thing, Doctor Strange. You'll fight Scarlet Witch and she'll kill you or something. Or maybe like all these mages are being killed across the world, so WandaVision attacks him. That being said, there is a post-credits scene in WandaVision with some darker overtones, so we'll have to see. But I really don't want them to make her into a villain after all this stuff, because it goes against the grain of the character development in the show if they go in that direction. This is about Wanda coming terms with that grief. And you don't turn into a villain after coming to terms with that grief in this way. She sort of has accepted Vision's death for what it is, at least for now. Plus, on top of that, we also, and we haven't mentioned this yet, we got the origins of Photon. And now we have Monica Rambeau, who's basically off to be in the next Captain Marvel movie, as far as I can tell, based on her character's ending in this show, which was great, if you ask me. Zach Taft says, so do you think the MCU Spider-Man would say if this helps Black Widow in a fight, Spider... Huh? What? I'm losing you there. You guys gotta work on your grammar sometimes. Shadowcatcher says, White Vision just leaving was funny as hell, and Calinity seconded that. I am right there with you, Shadowcatcher. I liked that moment. It was a great character moment where like White Vision kind of learns to trust regular or like Illusion Vision, we'll say, just enough to let him unlock those memories, and then he's just like, okay, interesting, bye. I thought he was going to help out with like Wanda and everything, because if he had those memories, that's what I would expect that character to do. Sorry, there's someone over there in the shower right now. It's fine. I'm not too worried about them. And then Shadowcatcher also says White Vision didn't even get a post-credit scene. True. Planety says Paul Bettany talking about working with himself. They did that really well, and just through clever use of makeup and stuff like that, it was quite impressive. We see a lot of that character duplicate actor thing, and I think Paul did it quite well. He's such a good actor. That Elizabeth Olsen really showed off her acting chops in this series and her range, which we hadn't got to see as Wanda before. We have seen a pretty considerable range from Paul Bettany as Vision before, but it's just so good seeing him get to do all these things in the show, which so much is as much his show as Wanda's, and they did a really good job at making it about as much, like almost as much about him as it was about her, because Wanda is the catalyst of all these events and very much in control of these things, but it's all about Vision, and I quite like all of that. But yeah, it would have been nice for a post-credit scene in White Vision. It'll be interesting to see where that character goes, because that's a page out of the comics, kind of. And it feels like that sort of puts him on the table to appear in like future Avengers properties or who knows what. And for like regular Vision to potentially kind of come back one day in some form or another. So we shall see. It's kind of cool though, because it seems like he's just also a bit of a different, distinct being. Because the Vision we know, like I said, would go and help Wanda. So this is someone different, even if he kind of has these memories now. Maybe not the motions attached to them like those androids we're talking about in the show. Michelle says, we are so sure that Falcon and Winter Soldier will have great fights in the episode. Can't wait for the appearance for U.S. Agent. I saw behind the scenes a U.S. Agent fight sequence. It looks good. Yeah, so like everyone kind of seems to be going around the consensus that unlike WandaVision, it's going to be more action heavy because the characters of Winter Soldier and Falcon basically demand it. And I don't think we should expect anything otherwise. Like, yeah, that's absolutely the case. It should be pretty action heavy. It's cool U.S. Agent's going to be in all of that, especially in the context of like Captain America, or at least like this Chris Evans Captain America no longer being a thing. And I do imagine a big crux of that show is Sam Wilson kind of coming to accept the mantle of Captain America, which is pretty cool. I am optimistic about it. Let's put it that way. And I say optimistic just because you don't want to get your hopes too built up and your expectations too high, because that inevitably often will lead to disappointment. Michelle says, lesson learned, never put up expectations too high. That's my mistake. I thought Doctor Strange will make a cameo. You know, and I did try and warn people in my earlier reviews of WandaVision that, like, we really shouldn't get. A Doctor Strange cameo is a little more reasonable. I got excited and thought, like, Chris Evans might return or something like that, which was a mistake on my part. Like, Michelle was thinking Doctor Strange, people were thinking Magneto, and all this other stuff. And I actually really applaud Marvel for doing what they were always kind of going to do, because this is pretty standard for them, at keeping it relatively simple, letting the story be self contained, and only having a few hints at future events without making it too much of a build up or an unnecessary bloat. Where I really think they screwed up the most, though, was that whoever felt the need to have a big, like, laser space, like, sky battle at the end of this series, because it really put a damper on what was already a strong run. Hybrid makes what looks like an interesting point, actually. Another slow 10-year Marvel burn, but we're used to a new important movie every 3 months to push the story forward. Well, that's interesting. COVID's kind of screwed everything up, but I wonder what other hints we might have been supposed to have had by now through stuff like the Black Widow film and other things. Um, and I think that kind of makes things pretty interesting in terms of its potential going forward. I am curious how that's all going to work out. And the other thing that I think is absent, or like noticeably absent, is there isn't a ton of announcements about like an Avengers movie or anything like that. Like, we kind of know about these Disney Plus shows. We know about Doctor Strange, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I guess, Spider Man 3, The Eternals. I haven't heard a lot about, and then like Fantastic Four, but beyond that, like there's a weird absence of stuff I might expect. Um, Lenity says, even Deadpool making a break the fourth wall cameo. Oh, I never really expected that per se. I'm surprised that Evan Peters wasn't more of a thing. It's interesting how that was just kind of left as a bit of a hint for now without any confirmation of like an alternate universe or anything like that. So I kind of if one so WandaVision didn't really introduce this concept too much. I maintain it's really going to come around in the Doctor Strange content, and even then it might not be a full-fledged like alternate universe content. I think the Multiverse of Madness thing might be a bit of a misnomer, just in the sense of it's going to be its own little horror thing and not represent a full-blown multiverse like we're thinking of. But I could be wrong. I think we still got a ways away before they start really bringing in the X-Men and all that stuff. Like I said, I thought, like, from day one, I thought it was way too early for them people to be talking about House of M stuff or Magneto or anything like that. It's such a jump from what we've covered so far in this series that it really didn't feel the right direction, kind of thing. Zach asked if I'm going to play Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3. Well, I mean, I do have it in all the characters, so maybe there's a fun way to do it. It's the kind of game that strikes me as better with like some local multiplayer going on, and up until now, because of the pandemic, I haven't had a lot of people over, so I don't really think I do that. Shadowcatcher, like, until that's more of an option. Shadowcatcher says, I'm surprised they didn't bring Hawkeye into the Wanda, into talk Wanda down. He was the voice of reason twice for her. That's a good point, but I guess it comes down to like, well, he's got his own Disney Plus series or something like that. But he does feel like the kind of person that Sword would have contacted to sort of help with this, or any other Avenger. But that gets into like, oh well, that would have been expensive, and this is just a weird like online TV show thing. So we didn't have a lot of other MCU actors beyond like some of the supporting characters from other movies, which was interesting. I guess Monica Rambeau kind of filled that role, but she never knew Wanda from before. So, although one could say they do that because uh, Sword doesn't trust the Avengers and stuff like that, but they felt they could control Monica more, which I would think actually does kind of fit with what we know about the agency and how they were operating throughout this series. So, it would have been interesting, but I understand why it didn't happen. It didn't even make sense within the context of the story, especially given that Hawkeye is a mass murderer now because of all that Ronin crap, which I don't necessarily like or I approve of or I'm okay with at all, but we don't need to talk about all that now. Calinity says we didn't understand well how the multiverse works. Anything that Sam Raimi does, I am up for. He was so happy he's doing Doctor Strange too. Yeah, I'm very optimistic of it, and that gets into like not only Sam Raimi but Kevin Feige, all the people behind the MCU and who are going to be talking through this movie, like and developing Doctor Strange 2, don't seem the kind of people who are dumb enough to make Wanda the villain. But that's what I agree with what Calinity is saying there. Like we need a movie to kind of introduce people to the multiverse, so then we can get into whatever story Marvel wants to do to introduce the X-Men. That's how I think they're going to go about it. Zach Taft says, "Do you think Mary Jane as Tony Stark's personal assistant would work with an older Spider-Man?" Uh, I guess they did in the comics, and to be honest, it didn't work though. But I think it could work just with a better writer than people like Dan Slott handling everything and Bendis. Oof. Michelle says they said that Shang-Chi will introduce some mutants, and can't for that film. It's more like a Bond film. Oh, can't wait for that film. It's more like a Bond film. Yeah, that's a cool idea. I like, and that's something they could always do is just sort of have mutants start to rise up. But if they are going to introduce it, maybe Doctor Strange really is just going to be this crazy multiverse event that changes things. If so, that might recontextualize Wanda's role a little bit, but we'll have to see. Michelle says, I hope they will introduce Iron Fist in the right way, unlike last time. Oh boy, don't we all? I wonder if they're going to recast him or not. They are starting to get control of the Netflix characters again, so we can't really rule out the appearance of Daredevil or the Punisher or anything like that in the future, which is pretty exciting. And there's also Moon Knight in all of this equation. Like I hadn't mentioned Shang-Chi either, but there's a lot of excitement in the air and all these interesting things that can happen. I'm quite optimistic for all of it. Um, so yeah, and we'll be here to review it. So that's a nice little segue out of this, I guess. My company just finished up in the shower over there, so I'm gonna go deal with that, I guess. And oh wait, we got another question. Hybrid says, "Who can carry the MCU for the next few phases like Iron Man and Captain America did?" Well, personally, I don't really feel you need those characters to review it. Uh oh. I was starting to wrap up and people are talking in chat again, so we'll see how long this goes. Uh, uh, I disagree. I agree with the idea that that's how Marvel handle these things, but I disagree with the premise that you need characters to carry a franchise like that. And if anything, that leads to situations where, oh geez, Chadwick Boseman died, so we can't rely on him to do that anymore, because that would have been a good choice. So, my preference would be that there aren't characters like that. But if it is, and it ends up being characters like Wanda Maximoff and Doctor Strange taking that lead, that would be interesting. But I'd rather it be like, no, there's just different characters, and it's this community of heroes, kind of like the comic books. Trinity says Moon Knight is literally Marvel's Batman. I disagree, actually. I understand that comparison happens a lot, and to a degree, Moon Knight was originally just a Batman ripoff, but because of his struggles with mental health, his connection with the Egyptian mythology, and the way story arcs like Alice's Moon Knight, I should say, have been handled over the years, he's a very distinct identity, quite different from Batman. And I don't think that comparison is adequate or correct anymore, even though they are, in the most broad and vaguest sense, similar characters. Revolutionary Hippie says, "Do you think that they will recast Black Panther in the third film?" I really don't know. I think they should though. It's rough to just say, "Oh, Black Panther's done for however long now because Chadwick Boseman died," and I think we as a Western society need to get into our heads a little more that actors change, while like some characters live forever, like Captain America and Iron Man, because and I compare it more to something like James Bond, which has had half a dozen actors over the years and stuff. That seems more what the direction I would go for if I was in charge of the MCU, while also giving a bit of a grace period because Marvel has so many characters. We can kind of give Iron Man a back seat for almost a full decade before we need to revisit that, and perhaps that's what's for the best in terms of Black Panther. Vanity says they confirmed they should not recast. But I do think I disagree that they shouldn't just rule it out entirely. It might be interesting to have a situation though where Black Panther dies, because in the context of the story that role lives on and it has to pass on to somebody else within the like cast of Black Panther. And if I have a preference there, it's Shuri. Absolutely. She easily stands out as like the person who should kind of take the mantle from here on out. So we'll have to see. Todd Jumper says, I would like to see a sword show, perhaps with Darcy and Jimmy Woo, where they go on to investigate X-Files type investigations in the MCU. Well, hell, I would like to see that too, Todd Jumper. That sounds dope as hell. Zach Taff says, think the MCU could do Punisher good? They kind of did, because those Netflix shows are a Punisher show. So, you think they would do that given how Punisher merchandise was found on the people who stormed DC? Yeah, Marvel has kind of not so quiet, well, has quietly kind of not cared about Punisher anymore and stopped putting out a lot of his content because of that stuff. And I don't expect to see the Punisher turn up anytime soon in MCU stuff, even though I said they have the rights to those characters. That doesn't mean they plan on exercising those rights anytime soon. What I understand, Marvel is basically just done with that character for now because of the people who like him, which is interesting. That's fascinating behavior, because we can't tell them whether or not to do that one way or the other. That like they're a private company, they can do whatever they want with those characters. So I just find that fascinating. Calinity says I would watch that too, in reference to Todd Jumper's brilliant idea for a sword show. And, you know, that's one of those things where it's like Darcy is not one of my favorite characters in the world. I don't hate Kat Dennings the way some people do or whatever, but put her in a show with Jimmy Woo and give them like that premise that Todd Jumper just outlined, and I am 100% in, just with Calinity and stuff. Like, that is a creative idea, and it sounds fun as hell as just sort of this ongoing thing. They worked well together and had good chemistry as just sort of these like agents working as a team. And like I said, I didn't care about those characters much in the context of the show, but something like that sounds great, where they have a bit more of a purpose and can kind of take center stage. That would be great. And there's so many interesting things you could do because the world of Marvel is so big and broad. There's a lot of stories they can kind of piggyback and use, and it would kind of be almost like a spiritual successor to Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which would be neat. So Todd Jumper, what you need to do is get on your email and start contacting people. Well, unfortunately, they don't actually want people to do this, but you got to pitch it to someone at Disney Plus, because that's a rock solid idea. But you got to do it as a pitch. Don't start sending random writers and editors your ideas, because they can't really accept unsolicited content. So you got to find yourself an agent. Steve Chevy says, remember when Vision went as a PI for a little while in the comics? That's when he got to go do LOL. I'm not sure what you mean there, but I do remember the thing, and that'd be interesting if Vision kind of got his own show too, doing like little private detective work. Clinity says Shuri will be Black Panther or maybe a Killmonger redemption. You see, I'd be for Killmonger, but the character is supposed to be dead, right? So, but if you actually brought back like Michael B. Jordan for that, oh man, found a way to do it that wasn't like a hacky return to life or whatever, that would be neat. Um, I'm not sure what you're saying in reference to that with the Civil War thing, but fair enough. Yeah, I know you can play Marvel Ultimate Alliance 3 online. I just think it's experience. Hot Jumper says, yep, instead of Creature of the Week, they could be tracking down supervillains, mutants, and so forth, like one-shot comic books. Oh, sure. Or even just like, oh, we found like fallout from whatever story, just this like artifact of Asgardian origin or stuff like that. So many things, random little characters that appeared in like a single Spider-Man book 2 decades ago. So many things you could do. The well runs deep in that regard if you have the right kind of writers who are looking up comics and figuring out things like this. Michelle says Jimmy Woo's journey to learn magic, online magic college. I laughed at that part so hard. We all knew that he is obsessed to learn the card trick in the Ant-Man and Wasp film, showing it off to Monica. He was that was fun, and his character was I really liked, especially how he kind of like took over Sword at the end. That was a fun little detail. Um, oh, I see what Zach and Call and Nitty are talking about in chat. Because there is comics where Punisher has talked about like cops using his image, but Zach was asking about the people who stormed DC, which is a more recent event that Marvel hasn't responded to, and might just that was saying like they were already stepping away from Punisher's character before that happened. They might just be pissed and done with the Punisher for a long, long time because of stuff like that. Which is interesting. It's an interesting reaction. I don't know what to make of that, to be honest. Revolutionary Hippie says, "What about mutants being people related to Eternals or having the Eternal bloodline?" Oh, I hope not. Just and the reason I say that is because Marvel's most interesting when you have these domains. So you could be like a technology-based hero, or you could get your powers in some sort of genetic accident, or you could be an Inhuman, or you could be an Eternal, or you could be a mutant, or any number of other things. You could be a demigod or something like that. The more stuff there is, the more opportunity for different characters and different ideas. So I get what you're saying, and it's just an interesting way of bringing in the connection through the Eternals. But my strong preference would be that for that not to be the case. Mutants should be their own thing, like they've always been. Um, Salinity says, I mean, the Marvel Universe comic, they find it strange that people actually buy Punisher merch since he is a cold-hearted killer. That's a good point. Uh, they've talked about this issue a lot, and the paradox of people liking the Punisher when he is like this violent socio, or no, not socio, but like psychopath. And that's just something that we kind of have to weather a little bit, I think, and weigh against the reality of the character with it. I actually, if I were in charge of Marvel, I don't think my choice would be to abandon the character, but I think my preference would be to rather find a writer who's pissed about this, even if it's someone like Jerry Conroy, who created the Punisher, and get him to just write for the character and just make it clear that the Punisher, like, just have the Punisher show up and just start killing the people who storm DC or something. Just be explicit about it, because they've been explicit about how the Punisher feels about cops who worship the Punisher, and if they do that again, I think it's okay. Um, but the weird thing is, Marvel's very good at pursuing copyright, so it's weird that these people can get away with using the Punisher's logo without Marvel going after them. Some might call it suspicious. So maybe that's why they're like, I don't know, reacting to all this business with the Punisher in such a strange way. It might not be easy to sue people in that context, so Marvel is getting frustrated because of it, or something, or Disney. You know, it's all the same. I don't know who's in charge of these decisions, but yeah. The Ninja Genko, thanks for joining us. Oh, Revolutionary Hippie says, how else would they explain Apocalypse or Wolverine being so old? Exactly, right? That's the thing. All these ideas about the mutants kind of emerging, like in Shang-Chi, I really feel like there needs to be some sort of catalyst event to explain stuff like that and to give mutants part of their slice of history in this world, because otherwise I don't think it works, or those characters don't work as they were originally written. And I think that takes away from someone like Wolverine to say, oh no, he's new. that that's not that's going against a core part of Wolverine's identity. And to be honest, that's not how Marvel does things ever. They are much more loyal to the comics than that, for better or worse. And I can't imagine them making such a big change. Kennedy says they reset the X Men in the 90s in the last X Men movie. Oh, well, God, they reset the X Men like 3 different times across the Fox timeline. I sincerely don't think most of the events in any of the X Men movies will have any bearing on the mutants and the X Men in the MCU, with the exception of fun little nods like Evan Peters' Quicksilver and Deadpool being outright part of it all. Um, there are no plans to bring any of that content in from before. I think Marvel is very much looking for a relatively clean slate, and I think people really need to get in their heads that they're probably going to take their time. That Shang-Chi stuff very well could just be rumors or just like a misunderstanding of their plans for all that. You could have X-Men or mutant style characters without them being outright mutants, for example. Clinty says, so they would be like 20, 30 years older in the actual MCU if they were in the same universe. Yeah, none of that really is relevant. Like, none of the X-Men timeline stuff matters. Hot Jumper says, Wolverine could have existed for years and still be introduced. True. After all, Agatha had been around since the 1600s and we're just now seeing here. That's a very good point, especially because Wolverine could have been in hiding all this time. It's not like anyone on the Avengers has a superpower detector. You just need a good reason for why Wolverine had no interest in engaging with anything around the blip, all this other key events like the rise of the Avengers and stuff like that, and why nobody's even mentioned the idea of mutants before. My preference would be for them to be there to be some sort of multiversal level event and explain it all. But that's just me. So that ended up being a nice discussion of WandaVision and the MCU and stuff. I think I'm going to wrap it up there, but that was a nice active stream. So thank you everybody who joined me and talked all things WandaVision. That was fun, but I got some stuff to do, people waiting on me, so I got to go. But y'all have a good evening. The boss, thanks for joining us. Hopefully you can watch the whole thing after, but we're going to head out for now. So y'all have a good evening, and I'll see you next time here on Comic Island. Her